blood on Victoria Palmer's hands would not wash away no matter how hard she scrubbed them in the creek, and somewhere behind her in the darkness she could hear the horses crashing through the underbrush, their riders calling out to each other with voices full of murder. She had seen what they did to her father, watched through the crack in the barn door as they beat the truth out of him about the land deeds he had hidden, the proof of their stolen claims and forged signatures that would strip half the cattle barons in northern Arizona of their ill-gotten ranches. Her father had died without speaking, but they knew she had been there, knew she had heard everything, and now they would not stop until she was silenced too. The year was 1887, and Victoria was 22 years old, alone in the wilderness outside Winslow, Arizona, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the terrible knowledge that powerful men would see her dead before sunrise. She ran through the pines, her skirts catching on branches, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the September night air burned her lungs. Behind her, the voices grew closer, and she could hear the distinctive drawl of Clayton Morrison, the foreman of the Triple Crown Ranch, shouting orders to spread out and cut off her escape routes. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more, and they knew these woods far better than she did. Victoria stumbled over a root and went down hard, scraping her palms on the rocky ground. For a moment she lay there, tears streaming down her face, as she thought of her father's kind eyes and gentle hands, the way he had always protected her after her mother died of fever 5 years ago. He had been a surveyor and land agent, honest to a fault, and that honesty had gotten him killed. She wanted to give up, to let them find her and end this nightmare. But then she thought of the metal box buried beneath the floorboards of their small house, the documents inside that could bring justice not just for her father, but for dozens of families who had been cheated out of their land. If she died, that evidence died with her, and evil men would continue to prosper. She forced herself up and kept running, following the sound of water she hoped would lead her to the little Colorado River. If she could reach the river, maybe she could lose them in the current, float downstream to safety. But her foot caught again, and this time when she fell, she heard fabric rip, felt her dress tear away from the hem. She scrambled to her feet, but the damage was done, and when she tried to run, she tripped over the dragging cloth and went sprawling once more. The horses were so close now she could hear their breathing, hear the creak of leather saddles and the jingle of spurs. Victoria crawled behind a boulder and pressed herself against the cold stone, praying they would pass her by, praying for any kind of miracle. Through the trees she could see torchlight flickering, dancing shadows that turned the forest into something from a nightmare. Clayton Morrison's voice rang out clear and hard. She cannot have gone far. The girl is on foot and her dress will slow her down. Frank, you and the boys head downstream. Tommy, take the ridge. We will have her before dawn, and nobody will ever know she was out here. Victoria bit down on her knuckles to keep from sobbing. She was trapped, and they were going to find her. She thought about her father's last words, whispered to her through the barn wall before they had discovered him alive. Run, Victoria, run, and do not look back. Make this mean something. She had run, but she had not gotten far enough, and now there would be no justice, no reckoning for the men who had stolen and murdered their way to wealth. The torchlight was almost upon her, and she could hear footsteps crunching through the fallen pine needles. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother's face, wondered if she would see her parents again soon in whatever lay beyond this life. Then she heard something else, something that cut through the night like thunder, the sharp crack of a rifle shot, and Clayton Morrison cursing with surprise. Another shot, this one closer, and suddenly the horses were whinnying in alarm, and the men were shouting in confusion. Victoria opened her eyes and peered around the boulder to see a rider emerging from the tree line, his horse at full gallop, his rifle firing again and again into the air. He was shooting high, not trying to kill but to scatter, and it was working. The men who had been hunting her were wheeling their horses around trying to organize a defense, and in the chaos they had forgotten about her entirely. The rider came thundering past her hiding place, and for just a moment she saw his face in the torchlight, angular and strong beneath the brim of his hat, his eyes fierce with concentration. He fired another shot and shouted something she could not make out, and then he was spurring his horse directly toward Clayton Morrison and the main body of riders. They opened fire, and the night exploded with gunshots, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like lightning. Victoria did not wait to see what happened next. She gathered up her torn skirts and ran in the opposite direction, away from the fight, away from the voices. Behind her the shooting continued, and she heard men screaming orders, heard horses crashing through brush in pursuit of the mysterious rider. He was leading them away from her, drawing them off like a bird protecting its nest by feigning injury. She did not know who he was or why he was helping her, but she knew she could not waste the chance he was giving her. She ran until her legs would not carry her anymore, ran until the sounds of pursuit had faded into the distance, and the only thing she could hear was the rushing of the river ahead. She collapsed on the bank and lay there, gasping, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The water looked black and cold in the starlight, and she knew she should keep moving, should put as much distance between herself and Clayton Morrison's men as possible, but she could barely lift her head. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, and finally she forced herself to sit up and take stock of her situation. Her dress was torn and filthy, her hands were bleeding, and she had no food, no water, no weapons. Even if she made it to town, who would believe her? Clayton Morrison worked for James Rutherford, the richest man in northern Arizona, and Rutherford owned the sheriff and half the judges in the territory. Without the documents her father had hidden, she had no proof of anything, and they would simply kill her and claim she had died in some tragic accident. She needed to get back to Winslow, back to her house, and retrieve those documents. But the town was 15 miles away through hostile territory, and Morrison's men would be watching the roads. She would have to wait until daylight, would have to find some way to sneak past them. For now she needed to hide and rest and pray that the stranger who had saved her life had survived his desperate charge into the guns of her enemies. The night grew colder, and Victoria huddled beneath a stand of cottonwoods, wrapping her arms around herself and trying not to think about all the ways she could die out here. Mountain lions, rattlesnakes, exposure, or simply being found by the men who wanted her dead. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. And when the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the trees, she was already on her feet, preparing to move. That was when she heard the horse, approaching slowly from the direction of the shooting. Victoria froze, her heart hammering, trying to decide whether to run or hide, but the horse was alone. She could tell that much. And when the rider came into view, she recognized him from the night before. He was slumped in his saddle, his shirt dark with blood, but he was alive and he was coming toward her. Victoria stepped out from the trees, and the man's head came up sharply. His hand went to his pistols, but stopped when he saw her face. He straightened with visible effort and brought his horse to a halt a few yards away, studying her with eyes that were blue-gray like smoke. "You are the girl they were chasing," he said. His voice was rough, strained with pain. "You are hurt," Victoria replied, moving toward him. "Let me help you." "I will be fine," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he swayed in the saddle. Victoria reached up and caught his arm, steadying him. "You are bleeding badly. Get down from there before you fall." The man looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. He dismounted with a grunt of pain and stood there swaying while Victoria quickly examined the wound. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, passing clean through but leaving a ragged exit wound that was still seeping blood. She tore strips from her already ruined petticoat and bound it as tightly as she dared, and the man endured her ministrations without complaint, though she could see the tension in his jaw. "What is your name?" she asked as she worked. "Nathan Thornton," he said. "I have a small ranch about 10 miles north of Winslow. Was heading home from Flagstaff when I heard the shooting and came to see what was happening. Saw you running and figured you needed help." "They will kill you for helping me," Victoria said quietly. "Clayton Morrison works for James Rutherford, and Rutherford does not forgive." "I know who they are," Nathan said. I also know what kind of men they are, and I will not stand by while they hunt down a woman in the dark. Now suppose you tell me what this is all about, Victoria told him, the words spilling out in a rush. She told him about her father's work as a surveyor, about how he had discovered irregularities in land deeds all across Coconino County, forgeries and backdated claims that had allowed wealthy ranchers to steal thousands of acres from smaller homesteaders and even from the government itself. She told him how her father had gathered evidence, carefully documenting each case, and how he had been planning to take it to the territorial governor when Clayton Morrison and his men had come to the Palmer house 3 nights ago. They beat him, she said, her voice breaking. They beat him and asked where the documents were hidden. He would not tell them. He died without telling them. But they know I was there, know I heard everything. They cannot let me live. Nathan's face was grim. Where are these documents now? Hidden in our house in Winslow, beneath the floorboards in my father's study. I have to get them. Have to make sure they reach someone who can use them. It is the only way to make his death mean something. Rutherford will have men watching your house, Nathan said. You cannot just walk in and retrieve them. I know, Victoria said, but I have to try. Will you help me? Nathan studied her for a long moment, and Victoria found herself looking back at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-browned skin and the lean hardness of a man who worked the land for his living. There was a scar on his left cheek, and his hands were calloused, but his eyes were intelligent and kind. And when he finally nodded, she felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was clenched tight. I will help you, he said. But we need to be smart about this. If we ride straight into town, we will both end up dead. We need a plan. They spent the morning hidden in the cottonwoods while Nathan rested and regained some strength. Victoria used more strips of her petticoat to fashion a proper sling for his arm, and she cleaned the wound as best she could with river water, though she worried about infection. Nathan bore it all stoically, and when he caught her looking at him with concern, he actually smiled, a small quirk of his lips that transformed his whole face. I have survived worse than this, he said. Took an arrow in the leg during a Chiricahua raid 5 years back, and a horse kicked me in the ribs hard enough to crack 3 of them. I am not easy to kill. Let us hope it does not come to that, Victoria said. She sat back on her heels and looked at him seriously. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You could ride away right now and nobody would blame you. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. My father was a homesteader, he said finally. Claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act back in '78. He worked that land for 4 years, built a house and barn, planted crops, did everything the law required. Then one day men came from the Broken Arrow Ranch and said the land was theirs, showed papers that claimed they had owned it all along. My father fought it in court and lost because the judge was in Broken Arrow's pocket. He died of a heart attack 6 months later, and I think it was the injustice that killed him more than anything else. So when I see a girl being hunted by the same kind of men who destroyed my father, I do not ride away. Victoria reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. I am sorry about your father, and I am grateful for your help. I will not forget it. Nathan squeezed back, and for a moment they just sat there in the dappled sunlight, 2 strangers bound together by circumstance and shared loss. Then Nathan stood, moving carefully to avoid jarring his injured shoulder, and walked to where his horse was grazing on the sparse grass. Here is what we are going to do, Rice, he said. We wait until nightfall, then ride into Winslow the back way, through Miller Canyon. There's an old mining trail that will bring us out behind the church, just 2 blocks from your house. We go in quiet, get the documents, and get out. If we are lucky, Rutherford's men will still be watching the main roads and will not expect us to come from that direction. And if we are not lucky, Victoria asked, then we fight, Nathan said simply. But I would prefer not to, given that I'm currently operating with 1 good arm and you are unarmed. They waited out the day in hiding, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. Victoria found it strange how quickly she had come to trust this man, this stranger who had risked his life for her without hesitation. She watched him while he slept, saw how the lines of pain around his mouth softened in unconsciousness, and she felt something stir inside her that she did not quite recognize. Gratitude certainly, but something else too, something warmer and more complicated. When evening came, they shared the small amount of jerky Nathan had in his saddlebags, washing it down with river water. Then they mounted up, Victoria sitting behind Nathan with her arms around his waist, and began the careful journey toward Winslow. They rode slowly to avoid raising dust, sticking to the shadows where possible, and as the sun sank below the horizon, Victoria pressed her cheek against Nathan's back and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The mining trail was narrow and treacherous in the darkness, barely wide enough for a horse and rider. Twice the path crumbled beneath them, and Nathan's horse stumbled, and Victoria's heart leaped into her throat as she imagined them tumbling down into the canyon below. But Nathan was a skilled rider, and he kept them steady, murmuring encouragement to his mount. And eventually they emerged onto the outskirts of Winslow as the last light faded from the sky. The town was quiet, most folks having retired for the evening. Nathan guided his horse through the narrow alleys between buildings, avoiding the main street where lamplight spilled from saloon windows and the sound of a piano drifted on the evening air. They passed behind the general store, the livery stable, the small white church with its modest steeple, and finally came to the back fence of the Palmer property. Victoria's house was dark, a small wooden structure that had never been much but had been home. Her father had built it himself when they first came to Arizona, and she had watched it go up board by board, had helped him paint it white in the spring of 1884. Now it looked abandoned, lonely, and Victoria felt tears sting her eyes as she slid down from Nathan's horse and approached the back gate. "Wait," Nathan said softly. He dismounted and drew his pistol, scanning the shadows. "Something does not feel right." Victoria froze, her hand on the gate latch. "What do you mean?" "There," Nathan whispered, pointing toward the front of the house. Victoria followed his gaze and saw it too, the faint glow of a cigarette in the darkness, the silhouette of a man sitting on her front porch. They were watching the house just as Nathan had predicted. "How many?" Victoria breathed. "At least 2 that I can see, probably more inside." Nathan holstered his pistol and turned to her. "We need another way in. Is there a cellar? A root cellar, maybe?" Victoria thought hard. "There is a storm cellar on the south side. My father built it after a tornado came through 5 years ago. The entrance is behind the woodshed, hidden by bushes." "Can you get to the study from there?" "Yes, there are stairs leading up into the kitchen, and from there it is straight through to the study." Nathan nodded slowly. "All right. We try for the cellar. But if anything goes wrong, you run. Do not wait for me. Do not try to help. You just run, and do not stop until you are far away from here. Understood?" "I will not leave you," Victoria said stubbornly. "Victoria." Nathan took her by the shoulders, his eyes intense. "Those documents are too important. They are worth more than my life, more than yours. If something happens to me, you get those papers and you take them to the territorial governor in Prescott. Promise me." Victoria wanted to argue, but she could see the determination in his face and knew it would be pointless. "I promise," she whispered. They tied Nathan's horse to a tree behind the neighboring property and approached the Palmer house on foot, moving slowly through the shadows. The woodshed was right where Victoria remembered it, a small ramshackle structure that her father had always meant to repair but never got around to. Behind it, hidden by a tangle of manzanita bushes, was the cellar door, a heavy wooden panel set into the ground at an angle. Nathan pulled the bushes aside and lifted the door slowly, wincing as the hinges creaked. Victoria held her breath, waiting for shouts of alarm, but none came. The guard on the front porch was too far away to hear, and if there were men inside the house, they gave no sign of having noticed. Nathan descended into the darkness, and Victoria followed, pulling the door closed behind them. The cellar smelled of earth and old potatoes, and it was pitch black. Victoria felt her way forward carefully, her hands outstretched, until she found the stairs leading up to the kitchen door. She climbed them slowly, Nathan close behind her, and when she reached the top, she pressed her ear against the wood and listened. At first she heard nothing, but then there was the creak of floorboards and the low murmur of voices. Men were in the house, at least 2 of them, maybe more. Victoria's hand trembled as she gripped the door handle, knowing that on the other side were people who wanted her dead. But she thought of her father, thought of his last words, and she turned the handle slowly and pushed. The door opened into the kitchen without a sound. Nathan slipped through first, his pistol drawn, and Victoria followed. The kitchen was dark, but light spilled from the front room where the voices were coming from. Victoria could make out words now. Clayton Morrison's harsh drawl complaining about having to waste time watching an empty house. "The girl is long gone by now," Morrison was saying. "Probably froze to death in the woods or got eaten by a cougar. We should be out looking for that cowboy who shot at us instead of sitting here playing nursemaid to an empty house." "Boss says watch the house, so we watch the house," another voice replied. "Rutherford wants those documents and he thinks the girl will try to come back for them. Now shut up and deal the cards." Victoria and Nathan crept through the kitchen and down the narrow hallway toward the study. Every step seemed to take forever, and Victoria was certain the pounding of her heart was loud enough to wake the dead. But the men in the front room were focused on their card game and did not look up as Victoria and Nathan slipped past the doorway and into the study. Her father's room was exactly as she remembered it. The big oak desk cluttered with papers and surveying equipment, the bookshelf lined with legal texts and maps. But seeing it now, knowing she would never see him sitting there again, working late into the night by lamplight, nearly broke her. Victoria pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, and Nathan touched her arm gently, his eyes full of understanding. Victoria crossed to the desk and knelt beside it, running her hands over the floorboards until she found the one that was slightly loose. She worked her fingers under it and lifted, revealing a shallow space beneath. There, wrapped in oilcloth, was the metal box her father had shown her just days before his death. Victoria lifted it out carefully and opened it, checking to make sure the documents were still inside. They were. Dozens of pages covered in her father's careful handwriting, along with original deeds and surveys that proved the forgeries. She closed the box and stood, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. Nathan nodded toward the door and they began to make their way back toward the kitchen. They were halfway down the hall when disaster struck. Victoria's foot caught on a loose board and she stumbled, throwing out a hand to catch herself. Her palms slapped against the wall with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet house, and instantly the voices in the front room stopped. There was a moment of terrible silence, and then chairs scraped back and heavy footsteps started toward the hallway. "Go!" Nathan hissed, pushing Victoria toward the kitchen. She ran, clutching the box, and behind her she heard Nathan's pistol fire once, twice, 3 times. Men were shouting and more guns fired, and Victoria burst through the kitchen door and down the cellar stairs so fast she nearly fell. She heard Nathan behind her, heard him curse as he stumbled. And then they were both at the bottom of the stairs and racing for the exterior door. Victoria hit the cellar door at full speed and it flew open, spilling her out into the night. She scrambled to her feet and ran for the trees where they had left the horse, the metal box still clutched in her arms. Behind her she could hear men pouring out of the house, hear Clayton Morrison shouting orders to spread out and find them. Gunshots cracked in the darkness, and something hissed past Victoria's head so close she felt the wind of its passage. Nathan caught up to her as she reached the horse. His face was pale with pain, and fresh blood soaked his shirt, but his hands were steady as he lifted her into the saddle and swung up behind her. He spurred the horse into a gallop, and they tore off into the night with bullets whipping through the air around them. They rode hard for what felt like hours, pushing the horse to its limits. Behind them they could hear pursuit, the sound of many horses in full gallop. And Victoria knew that if they were caught now, there would be no mercy, no chance to explain. They would be shot on sight and the documents would be destroyed. She held the box tight and leaned low over the horse's neck, feeling Nathan's arms around her as he guided their mount through the darkness with the skill of someone who knew this land like the back of his hand. Eventually the sounds of pursuit faded, and Nathan slowed the horse to a walk, letting the exhausted animal catch its breath. They were deep in the high desert now, surrounded by sagebrush and juniper, with the dark bulk of the Mogollon Rim visible against the stars to the south. Victoria's whole body was shaking with adrenaline and fear, and when Nathan reined in and dismounted, she practically fell from the saddle into his arms. "You're bleeding again," she said, her voice high with worry. "Nathan, you need a doctor." "What I need is to put more distance between us and Rutherford's men," Nathan said. But his face was gray in the starlight, and Victoria could see he was barely staying on his feet. "There is a line shack about 5 miles from here. Used to belong to the Rocking H before they went under last year. Nobody will think to look for us there. We can rest and figure out our next move." They walked the horse to spare its strength, and Victoria stayed close to Nathan, ready to catch him if he fell. He did not fall, but she could see it was only through sheer determination that he remained upright. By the time they reached the line shack, a small, rough structure built of logs and chinked with mud, Nathan was barely conscious. Victoria helped him inside and lowered him to the floor as gently as she could. There was an old stove in the corner and some wood stacked beside it, and she quickly built a fire to provide light and warmth. Then she turned her attention to Nathan's wounds, peeling away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal the damage. The bullet wound in his shoulder had reopened and was bleeding freely, and there was a new injury, a deep graze across his ribs that looked like it had been made by a knife. Victoria tore more strips from her dress, which by now was little more than rags, and bound both wounds as tightly as she dared. Nathan endured it all in silence, his jaw clenched and his eyes closed, and when she was finished, he opened them and looked at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not leaving me behind." "I told you I wouldn't," Victoria said. "We are in this together now." She found a canteen of water in a corner of the shack and helped Nathan drink, then took a long swallow herself. The water was stale and metallic, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. She sat back against the wall and finally allowed herself to relax, just a little, now that they were safe for the moment. "We need to get these documents to Prescott," Nathan said. "It is a 4-day ride from here, maybe 5 if we have to go slow to avoid Rutherford's men. Do you think you can make it?" "Can you?" Victoria countered. "You are hurt badly, Nathan. You need proper medical attention, not just my clumsy bandaging." "I will manage," Nathan said. "I have no choice. If we go to a doctor in Winslow or Flagstaff, word will get back to Rutherford within hours. Our only chance is to reach the territorial governor and put these documents in his hands. Once they are public knowledge, Rutherford will not dare touch us for fear of confirming everything they reveal." Victoria knew he was right, but she hated it. She hated that this brave man had been hurt because of her, hated that they were being hunted like animals for trying to do the right thing. But most of all, she hated the men who had killed her father and were now trying to kill her and Nathan too. That hate gave her strength, hardened her resolve. "Then we ride for Prescott," she said, "but we rest here until dawn. You need to regain your strength and the horse needs to recover. We will not make it 4 days if we push too hard now." Nathan looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He nodded and closed his eyes, and within minutes his breathing had deepened into sleep. Victoria sat watching him, studying the lines of his face in the firelight. He was a good man, she thought, the kind of man her father had been, the kind who would risk everything for what was right. She found herself wondering what his life was like on his ranch, whether he had family, whether there was someone waiting for him to come home. The thought of another woman in Nathan's life brought an unexpected pang of something that felt almost like jealousy, and Victoria was startled by the intensity of it. She barely knew this man, had met him less than 24 hours ago, and yet already she felt connected to him in a way she had never felt with anyone before. Maybe it was just the circumstances, the shared danger and forced intimacy, but it felt like more than that. It felt like recognition, like her soul had known his before their eyes ever met. Victoria must have dozed off because when she opened her eyes again, pale light was filtering through the cracks in the walls and Nathan was awake, trying to sit up. She hurried over to help him, and he smiled at her, a real smile this time that reached his eyes. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I got trampled by a herd of longhorns," Nathan admitted. "But better than last night. Your nursing skills are not as clumsy as you think." "I watched my mother care for sick neighbors when I was young," Victoria said. "I suppose some of it stuck with me." She helped him to his feet, and he walked slowly around the shack, testing his strength. The bleeding had stopped and his color was better, though he still moved carefully to avoid jarring his injuries. They had nothing to eat but shared water from the canteen, and then Nathan saddled his horse and helped Victoria mount. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of perfect Arizona day that made you forget how brutal the desert could be. They rode northwest toward Prescott, taking back roads and game trails, avoiding anywhere they might encounter other people. It was slow going, but Nathan knew the country well, and he guided them through landscapes of stunning beauty, across high mesas and through hidden canyons where ancient cliff dwellings spoke of peoples long vanished. As they rode, they talked. Victoria told Nathan about her childhood in Missouri, about how her father had brought them west after her mother's death in search of a fresh start. She told him about learning to ride and shoot, about helping her father with his surveying work, about the small joys she had found in their Arizona life despite its hardships. And Nathan told her about growing up on his father's failed homestead, about working as a cowhand for various ranches before saving enough to buy his own land, about the satisfaction he found in building something with his own hands. The more they talked, the more Victoria felt that connection deepening. She found herself noticing little things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet competence in how he handled the horse and navigated the terrain, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke of his father. She caught him looking at her too, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that made warmth spread through her chest. They made camp that night in a box canyon sheltered from the wind, and after they had tended the horse and built a small fire, Nathan sat down beside Victoria and was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he turned to her and spoke, his voice serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I know we have only known each other a short time, but these past 2 days have meant something to me. You are brave and strong, and you have not complained once about any of this, even though you have every right to. I just want you to know that whatever happens when we reach Prescott, whether the governor helps us or not, I intend to see this through to the end. I will not abandon you." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes. "Nathan, you have already done so much. You have been shot and chased, and your whole life has been turned upside down because you stopped to help a stranger. I cannot ask any more of you." "You are not asking," Nathan said. "I am offering, and you are not a stranger anymore, Victoria. You are important to me, more important than I probably have any right to say given the circumstances, but it is the truth, and I want you to know it." Victoria reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You are important to me too," she said softly. "When I saw you riding out of the darkness that first night, it was like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was saying. You saved my life, Nathan, but more than that, you gave me hope. Hope that there are still good people in this world, that not everyone is corrupt or cruel." Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "Your father was a good man too. What he did, gathering that evidence, knowing it could get him killed, that took real courage. He would be proud of you for finishing what he started." "I hope so," Victoria whispered. "I hope he can see us wherever he is and knows that his death will not be in vain." They sat together in the firelight, hands clasped, and Victoria felt something shift between them, some invisible barrier dissolving. When Nathan turned to her, his eyes were full of question and invitation, and Victoria answered by leaning in and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, But then Nathan's good arm came around her and pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and passionate and full of all the fear and longing and hope they had both been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Victoria could see her own emotions reflected in Nathan's eyes. This was madness, falling for someone so quickly under such circumstances, but it also felt right, felt inevitable, like gravity or the turning of the earth. They had been through something together that bonded them in ways normal courtship never could, and Victoria knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future held, she wanted Nathan Thornton in it. They spent that night wrapped in each other's arms, not making love. That felt too soon, and Nathan was too injured, but holding each other close and sharing whispered words and gentle kisses. Victoria had never felt so safe, so cherished, and when she finally drifted off to sleep, it was with Nathan's heartbeat steady beneath her ear and his hand stroking her hair. The next 3 days passed in a blur of riding and hiding and growing closer. Nathan's wounds continued to heal, slowly but surely, and Victoria found herself relaxing into a rhythm with him that felt natural and right. They developed an easy intimacy, reading each other's moods, anticipating each other's needs. When Nathan was in pain, Victoria knew it without him saying a word, and she would find ways to make him more comfortable. When Victoria grew quiet and withdrawn, lost in grief for her father, Nathan would tell her stories or point out some wonder of the landscape to draw her back to the present. They saw signs that Rutherford's men were still searching for them, glimpsed distant riders on a few occasions, and once had to hide in a dry wash while a group of armed men passed not 100 yards away. But their back trail approach kept them ahead of the search, and on the afternoon of the 4th day they crested a rise and saw Prescott spread out below them, the territorial capital with its government buildings and tree-lined streets. "We made it," Victoria breathed, hardly daring to believe it. "Almost," Nathan cautioned. "We still need to get these documents into the governor's hands, and Rutherford might have men here too. We need to be careful." They entered Prescott from the south as the sun was setting, 2 dusty, exhausted travelers on a tired horse. No one gave them a second glance as they made their way through the streets toward the territorial governor's mansion, a large adobe structure on the hill overlooking the town. Nathan dismounted and helped Victoria down, and together they walked up to the front door and knocked. A servant answered, a middle-aged Mexican woman who looked at their disheveled appearance with concern. "Can I help you?" "We need to see the governor," Nathan said. "It is urgent. Tell him we have evidence of land fraud that reaches to the highest levels of Coconino County." The woman looked doubtful, but something in Nathan's tone made her nod. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared inside. Victoria clutched the metal box and tried to calm her racing heart. They were so close now, so close to making this all mean something. But what if the governor refused to see them? What if he was corrupt too, bought and paid for by men like James Rutherford? What if they had come all this way for nothing? Then the door opened again, and a tall man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard appeared. He was perhaps 60 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I am Governor Conrad Meyer Tartarinus," he said. "My housekeeper says you have information about land fraud. I am listening." Nathan and Victoria exchanged glances, and then Victoria held out the metal box. "My father was Edmund Palmer, a surveyor and land agent in Winslow. He discovered evidence that land deeds all across northern Arizona have been forged and backdated, allowing wealthy ranchers to steal property from legitimate homesteaders. He was murdered for what he knew, and now the men who killed him are trying to kill me. This box contains everything he gathered, all the proof you need to prosecute the people responsible." Governor Meyer's expression grew grave. He took the box and opened it, pulling out several documents and scanning them quickly. His face darkened with anger as he read, and when he looked up, his eyes were hard as flint. "If what is in here is accurate, and it appears to be, this is the largest land fraud case in territorial history," he said. "Do you have names of the people involved?" "James Rutherford of the Triple Crown Ranch is the main architect," Victoria said. But there are others, maybe a dozen ranchers in all, along with several county officials who signed off on the fraudulent deeds. My father documented everything." The governor nodded slowly. "Come inside, both of you. You look like you have been through hell, and I want to hear this whole story from the beginning. Then I'm going to send for the territorial marshal, and we are going to start making arrests." Relief flooded through Victoria so intensely she felt her knees buckle. Nathan caught her and held her up, and the governor smiled for the first time. "You did well coming here," he said. "Your father would be proud. Now come in and let us get you cleaned up and fed. You're safe now, I give you my word." The next several hours were a whirlwind. Governor Meyer had his staff prepare rooms for Nathan and Victoria, and a doctor was summoned to tend to Nathan's wounds properly. Victoria was given clean clothes and a hot bath, and she cried when she sank into the warm water, releasing all the fear and tension of the past week. When she emerged dressed in a borrowed dress that actually fit, she found Nathan waiting for her in the parlor. His shoulder was properly bandaged now, and he had been given a clean shirt, and he looked more like himself than he had in days. They sat with the governor and told him everything, from Edmund Palmer's first discoveries to the night of his murder to their desperate flight through the woods and their journey to Prescott. Meyer listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail, and when they finished he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "James Rutherford has been a thorn in my side for years," he said, "but I never had proof of wrongdoing, just suspicions. He is rich and powerful, and he has friends in high places. This will not be easy even with your father's evidence. He will fight back with everything he has." "We understand that," Victoria said, "but we had to try. Justice has to mean something." "It does," Meyer said, turning back to face them, "and I promise you we will see this through. I am issuing arrest warrants tonight for Rutherford and all the others named in these documents. The territorial marshal will ride out at dawn with a full posse, and we will bring these men to trial. It may take months, maybe years, but we will get justice for your father and for all the people who were cheated." Victoria felt Nathan's hand find hers under the table and squeeze. They had done it. Against all odds. They had survived and delivered the evidence, and now the wheels of justice were beginning to turn. It would not bring her father back. Nothing could do that, but it was something, and it would have to be enough. The governor insisted they stay at the mansion until the immediate danger had passed. Over the next few days, news came back of arrests being made across northern Arizona. James Rutherford had barricaded himself in his ranch house and refused to surrender, but after a tense standoff, he was taken into custody along with Clayton Morrison and most of his men. Other ranchers implicated in the scheme were arrested one by one, and county officials who had enabled the fraud were removed from office. The newspapers picked up the story, and it became a sensation across the territory. Edmund Palmer was hailed as a hero, an honest man who had died fighting corruption, and his daughter Victoria was celebrated for her courage in bringing his killers to justice. Nathan, too, received attention for his role in the affair, and reporters from as far away as San Francisco came to interview them. Through it all, Nathan and Victoria stayed close, their bond deepening with each passing day. When Nathan's wounds had healed enough for him to travel, he took Victoria north to see his ranch, a modest spread of 300 acres with a small house and a barn and some decent grazing land. It was not much, but it was honest and clean, and Victoria loved it on sight. "I know it is not fancy," Nathan said, as they stood on the porch looking out over the land, "but it is mine, paid for with my own sweat and blood. I built that house myself, board by board, and I am proud of it." "It is wonderful," Victoria said sincerely. "It is a home, Nathan, a real home. That is worth more than all the fancy ranches in Arizona." Nathan turned to her, his eyes serious. "I want you to stay," he said. "I know it is too soon. I know we should wait and court properly, but I cannot help how I feel. I love you, Victoria. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when I saw you running through the woods, so brave and determined despite being terrified. I love your strength and your heart and the way you never gave up even when things looked darkest. I want to build a life with you here, if you will have me." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she said. "I think I knew it when you rode out to draw those men away from me, when you risked your life for a stranger. I have never met anyone like you, Nathan Thornton, and I do not want to spend another day without you. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to everything." Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and love he had been holding back, and Victoria kissed him back just as fiercely. When they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time, giddy with joy and relief and the simple wonder of having found each other against such impossible odds. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Winslow, with Governor Meyer himself in attendance, along with what seemed like half the territory. The trial of James Rutherford and his co-conspirators was still months away, but everyone already knew how it would end. The evidence Edmund Palmer had gathered was ironclad, and public opinion had turned decisively against the land grabbers. Victoria wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers, and when Nathan saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. They spoke their vows in voices that shook with emotion, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Victoria like a drowning man finding air. The reception was held at the Winslow Hotel, and people came from all over to celebrate with them and to hear the story of how they met one more time. Victoria stood beside her new husband and felt overwhelming gratitude for everything that had brought them to this moment, even the terrible things, because without them she would never have found Nathan. As the evening wore on and the party began to wind down, Nathan took Victoria's hand and led her outside under the stars. The night was cool and clear, and above them the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. "Are you happy?" Nathan asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Victoria replied. "My father is gone, and I will always grieve for him, but I know he would want me to live, to find joy again. And I have, Nathan. With you, I have found more than joy. I have found home." Nathan pulled her close, and they stood together in the darkness, two people who had been strangers a few short months ago, but who now knew each other's hearts as well as their own. The road ahead would not always be easy. Victoria knew that. There would be challenges and hardships, bad weather and hard times, but they would face it all together, and that made all the difference. The trial, when it finally happened 8 months later, was a sensation. James Rutherford and 14 other defendants were found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and murder. Rutherford himself was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison, effectively ending his reign as one of Arizona's most powerful ranchers. The stolen lands were returned to their rightful owners, and dozens of families who had been cheated received restitution. By that time, Victoria was 5 months pregnant with their first child. She and Nathan had settled into life on the ranch, working the land together and building something that would last. Nathan had expanded his herd and built a new barn, and Victoria had started a small garden and turned the house into a real home with curtains and rugs and touches of beauty wherever she could manage them. When their son was born in late autumn of 1888, they named him Edmund, after Victoria's father. He was a healthy baby with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and when Nathan held him for the first time, Victoria saw such love and wonder on his face that she fell in love with him all over again. "Thank you," Nathan whispered, looking up at her with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this. I never thought I would have a family of my own, and now I have everything I ever wanted." "We have everything," Victoria corrected gently, "and we earned it, Nathan. We fought for it, and we survived, and we built this life together. Our son will grow up knowing what his grandfather died for, knowing that his parents stood up against corruption and won. He will know what it means to fight for what is right." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, and Nathan's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher spread throughout the territory. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Rose and another son they called William, and their house rang with laughter and love. Victoria often thought of her father and wished he could have known his grandchildren, could have seen the life she had built from the ashes of that terrible night. But she felt his presence sometimes in quiet moments, felt his approval in the wind through the pines, and she knew he was at peace. Nathan proved to be everything Victoria could have hoped for in a husband. He was kind and patient, a devoted father who spent hours playing with his children and teaching them about the land. He never raised his voice in anger, and he treated Victoria with a respect and tenderness that made her feel cherished every day of their life together. And the passion between them never faded, even as the years passed and their hair began to show gray. They would steal moments alone whenever they could, sneaking away to the barn or the creek for kisses and whispered words of love. And Victoria never stopped being grateful that fate had brought this man into her life. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Nathan and Victoria were there in Phoenix for the ceremony, standing with their grown children and watching as the flag was raised. Edmund was 23 by then, already running the ranch alongside his father. Rose was 20 and engaged to be married to the son of a neighboring rancher, and William was 18 and talking about going to college to study law, inspired by his grandfather's legacy. Victoria stood beside Nathan and felt his hand find hers, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. "We made it," she said softly. "Arizona is a state, and our children are grown and happy. We did everything we set out to do." "We did more than that," Nathan replied. "We built a life full of love and raised 3 good people who will make the world better. Your father would be so proud of you, Victoria. I know I am." Victoria leaned her head on Nathan's shoulder and watched the celebration unfold around them. It had been 25 years since that terrible night when she had run through the woods with killers on her heels. 25 years since a stranger had ridden out of the darkness to save her life. She had been young and terrified and certain she would die. But instead she had lived. She had loved and been loved in return, had raised children and built a home, and helped bring justice to a corrupt system. As the sun set over Phoenix and the crowd began to disperse, Nathan turned to Victoria and pulled her close. "I love you," he said. The same words he had spoken on their wedding day and 1,000 times since. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Victoria replied. "Thank you for saving me, Nathan. Not just that first night, but every day since. You gave me a life worth living." They kissed there in the fading light. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from tragedy and pain. And as they walked back to their hotel, surrounded by their children and the bustle of the celebrating crowds, Victoria Palmer Thornton smiled and knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living the life she had fought so hard to claim. The ranch continued to thrive through the decades that followed. Edmund took over full management when Nathan turned 60, allowing his parents to slow down and enjoy their grandchildren. Rose married her rancher and settled nearby, giving Victoria and Nathan 3 grandchildren to spoil. William became a lawyer as planned and eventually a judge, carrying on his grandfather's legacy of fighting for justice. Nathan and Victoria grew old together on the land they loved, their hair turning white and their bodies growing frail, but their love remaining strong as ever. They would sit on the porch in the evenings holding hands and watching the sun set over the Arizona landscape, and they would remember that long ago night when their lives had collided in violence and terror and somehow miraculously transformed into this peaceful, love-filled existence. On a warm spring evening in 1934, 47 years after they first met, Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep with Victoria beside him. He was 73 years old and had lived a full, rich life, but Victoria felt his loss like a physical wound. They had been together for so long, had been through so much that she did not quite know how to exist without him. But she found strength in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She lived for 3 more years, long enough to see Edmund's own children grown and starting families of their own, long enough to know that what she and Nathan had created would continue long after they were gone. And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time in the summer of 1937, it was with Nathan's name on her lips and the certainty that she would see him again. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree that Nathan had planted the year they were married. Their headstones were simple, just their names and dates and a single line that Edmund had chosen. They chased her through the woods, but love led them home. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, and the story of how it all began became family legend. Every Thornton child grew up hearing about brave Victoria Palmer, who had refused to let her father's death be meaningless, and about courageous Nathan Thornton, who had risked everything to save a stranger and found his soulmate in the process. The story was told at weddings and family gatherings, a reminder of where they came from and what their ancestors had fought for. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the pines, people swore they could feel the presence of Victoria and Nathan still lingering on the land they had loved so much, two souls bound together for eternity, their love story echoing down through the years as a testament to the power of courage, justice, and the kind of love that changes everything. The documents that Edmund Palmer had died protecting eventually helped reshape land ownership laws across Arizona and throughout the West, ensuring that what had happened in Coconino County could never happen again. His work and Victoria's determination to see it through had lasting impact that touched thousands of lives. The Palmer name became synonymous with integrity and courage, and more than one Arizona law or landmark bore Edmund's name in recognition of his sacrifice. But for Victoria and Nathan, the real legacy was simpler and more profound. It was the life they had built together from those dark beginnings, the love they had found in the midst of tragedy, and the family they had raised to carry on their values. It was proof that even in the hardest times, even when evil seemed triumphant and justice seemed impossible, good people could still make a difference. They could still fight back, still survive, and still find happiness on the other side of suffering. Their story became part of the fabric of Arizona history, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But to those who knew them, to the children and grandchildren who had seen their love firsthand, it was simply the truth of two remarkable people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful that would outlast them both. And on that hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of the old oak tree, their graves stood as a reminder that love can bloom even in the darkest soil, that courage can triumph over corruption, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with an ordinary person making the choice to do what is right, no matter the cost. Victoria Palmer had made that choice when she ran through the woods with killers at her heels, refusing to let her father's death be meaningless. Nathan Thornton had made that choice when he rode into danger to save a stranger, and together they had proven that such choices, however difficult and dangerous, were always worth making. The sun set over the Thornton Ranch, just as it had for over a century, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The land endured, the family endured, and somewhere in the wind that rustled through the oak leaves, the love of Victoria and Nathan endured too, eternal and unbreakable, a light in the darkness that would never fade.